The dust had barely settled from the collapse when Knox Foster realized he had lost everything he had spent 3 years building in the hard Utah Territory soil. He stood there in the doorway of what remained of his ranch house, his chest tight with something between rage and despair, staring at the massive cedar beam that had given way during the night and brought half the roof down with it. Everything he owned lay buried under splintered wood and chunks of dried mud plaster, his furniture crushed, his winter supplies spoiled, his photographs of his parents turned to pulp from the water barrel that had split open in the chaos. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wreckage, and for the first time since leaving Missouri 3 years ago, Knox wondered if he had made a terrible mistake coming to Taylorsville, Utah. He was 26 years old and had nothing to show for it but calloused hands and a pile of rubble. The ranch had been his dream, a modest spread with good grazing land and a creek that ran year-round, enough to build something real for himself. He had worked every daylight hour to make it happen, trading his labor for supplies, breaking horses for neighboring ranchers to earn enough for lumber, slowly constructing a life from nothing. Now it was gone. The irony was not lost on him that he had survived 3 years of backbreaking work, only to be defeated by a rotted beam he had not inspected closely enough. Knox kicked at a piece of shattered pottery that had once been his mother's serving dish and felt the anger drain out of him, replaced by exhaustion. He needed to start digging, needed to salvage what he could, but the task seemed impossible. Where did a man even begin when everything had caved in? He was still standing there, paralyzed by the magnitude of the disaster, when he heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Knox did not turn around at first, assuming it was just someone passing by on the main road that ran a quarter-mile from his property. But the wagon's sounds grew closer, turning off the road and coming up his drive, and curiosity finally made him look. The woman driving the wagon was no one he recognized, though that was not saying much since Knox kept mostly to himself. She sat straight-backed on the bench seat, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing a faded blue dress that had seen better days but was clean and well-mended. She brought the wagon to a halt about 20 feet from the house, set the brake, and climbed down with the easy movements of someone used to physical work. "Looks like you could use some help," she said, her voice carrying across the yard with a directness that surprised him. Knox frowned. "I can manage." "I am sure you can," she said, walking closer now, her eyes taking in the damage with what looked like a practiced assessment. "But it will take you weeks to dig out and rebuild on your own. I have got time and a strong back. Name is Grace Ramsey." "Knox Foster." He said it automatically, too tired to be properly suspicious. "And I cannot pay you. Did I ask for money?" Grace stopped a few feet from him, close enough that he could see her eyes were green with flecks of gold in them, unusual and striking. She looked to be in her early 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and the kind of lean strength that came from hard living. "I heard what happened from Mrs. Chen at the Mercantile. She mentioned you had been working this place alone. How did she know about the roof? Small town." "Jake Patterson rode by this morning and saw the damage, mentioned it when he stopped for tobacco." Grace shrugged. "Word travels fast in Taylorsville." Knox wanted to refuse the help. He had been on his own long enough that accepting charity felt like admitting defeat. But as he looked at the ruins of his house again, pride seemed like a luxury he could not afford. "Why would you help a stranger?" Grace's expression shifted, something sad flickering across her face before she smoothed it away. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything. And because nobody should have to dig themselves out alone." There was a story there Knox could tell, but he did not press. Instead, he nodded slowly. "All right then, I appreciate it. Where do you want to start?" They started with the most urgent task, which was clearing debris from the area where Knox kept his tools. He needed shovels, hammers, his saw, all the equipment that would help them rebuild. Grace worked without complaint, lifting boards and hauling away broken furniture with a determination that matched his own. She did not talk much at first, focused on the work, but Knox found himself watching her when she was not looking. There was something about the way she moved, efficient and sure, that spoke of experience. She knew how to lift without straining her back, how to test the stability of a beam before putting weight on it, practical knowledge that most town women would not have. When they uncovered a section of collapsed wall that was too heavy for one person to manage, Grace rigged up a simple lever system using a plank and a rock, then showed Knox how to maximize their combined strength. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, genuinely curious now. "My father was a carpenter back in Ohio. I grew up on job sites." She paused, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "He taught me everything he knew before he died. I am sorry. It was 5 years ago. I have made my peace with it." Grace grabbed one end of the beam they had just freed. "On 3. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, stopping only when the heat became too oppressive. Knox had a well that was still functional, and they drew up cold water, passing the ladle back and forth in companionable silence. Grace sat on an overturned bucket, her dress dusty and her face flushed from exertion, looking more real and solid than anyone Knox had met in a long time. "You live in town?" he asked, making conversation feel awkward after hours of easy cooperation. "Just outside. I've got a small place, couple of acres. I do sewing and washing to make ends meet, sell vegetables when the garden produces." Grace drank more water than looked at him directly. "I am not married, if that is what you are wondering. No family here. Came west after my mother passed, looking for a fresh start." Knox nodded. "Same reason I came. Got tired of being the youngest son with no prospects. Figured Utah territory offered more opportunities." "Does it?" He laughed, a bitter sound. "Ask me again when I've got a roof over my head." Grace smiled then, the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face entirely. She was pretty, he realized with a start, not in the delicate way of the women in town who avoided the sun and kept their hands soft, but in a way that felt true and unadorned. The realization unsettled him, and he stood up abruptly. "We should get back to it. Want to clear as much as possible before dark." They worked until the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if Knox had been in a mood to appreciate it. By the time Grace finally declared they had done enough for one day, they had cleared about a third of the debris and created organized piles of salvageable lumber, ruined materials, and personal items that might be restored. "I will be back tomorrow morning," Grace said as she climbed onto her wagon. "Early before it gets too hot." "You do not have to do this," Knox said, even though he desperately needed the help. "I know." Grace gathered the reins, then looked down at him. "But I want to." "That is enough reason, is it not?" She left before he could respond, the wagon rattling back down the drive as darkness settled over the valley. Knox stood watching until she disappeared from sight, then turned back to survey what they had accomplished. It was more than he could have done alone, significantly more, and for the first time since waking to the sound of his roof collapsing, he felt something like hope. Grace returned the next morning as promised, arriving with the dawn and bringing a basket packed with biscuits and bacon wrapped in cloth. They ate breakfast sitting on the porch steps, one of the few parts of the structure still intact, and talked about the plan for the day. Knox wanted to start assessing which beams could be reused and what new lumber he would need to purchase, while Grace suggested they continue the excavation to make sure they had not missed anything valuable. "Most of what I owned is not valuable," Knox said, "except maybe the photographs. If we can find those and they are not completely destroyed, I would like to save them." "We will find them," Grace promised. "What else matters to you?" The question caught him off guard. People did not usually ask what mattered. They assumed they knew or did not care enough to find out. Knox thought about it while he chewed a piece of bacon. "There is a pocket watch that belonged to my grandfather. Silver, with my family initials engraved on the back. It was on the table next to my bed." "Then we will find it," Grace said with a confidence that made him almost believe her. They spent the morning carefully sorting through the rubble from the bedroom area, and it was slow, painstaking work that required patience Knox did not know he possessed. But Grace's steady presence made it easier somehow. She worked methodically, examining each item before setting it aside, never rushing even when the heat began to build. It was just before noon when Grace made a small sound of triumph and held up something that glinted in the sunlight. "Is this it?" Knox took the watch from her hand, his throat suddenly tight. The silver was dented and the glass face was cracked, but the mechanism still worked when he wound it, the familiar ticking sound bringing back memories of his grandfather's workshop in Missouri. "Yes, thank you. It is a good watch. My father would have appreciated the craftsmanship." Grace smiled at him. "See, not everything is lost." They found the photographs an hour later, water damaged but not destroyed. Grace suggested laying them flat in the sun to dry, weighing down the corners with pebbles to keep them from curling. Knox watched her arrange them with such care, treating his family's faces like they mattered, and something shifted in his chest. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked quietly. Grace did not answer right away. She finished placing the last photograph, then sat back on her heels and looked at him. "Because when I first came to Taylorsville, I was alone and scared and had nowhere to go. The Chen family took me in, gave me work and a place to stay until I could afford my own place. They did not have to do that. They did it because they believed people should help each other." She stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. "I am just passing along what was given to me." Knox did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded and they went back to work. The days began to blur together in a rhythm of labor and conversation. Grace arrived each morning with food. They worked until the afternoon heat drove them to shade, then continued into the evening until exhaustion forced them to stop. Slowly, the wreckage transformed from an overwhelming disaster into manageable pieces. They salvaged more than Knox had expected, enough lumber and materials that rebuilding seemed possible rather than a distant dream. But more than the physical progress, something else was building between them. Knox found himself looking forward to Grace's arrival each morning, the way she would wave from the wagon as she came up the drive, the easy smile she offered as she set down her basket. He learned that she sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs in a clear, strong voice that made the hours pass faster. He discovered she had a dry sense of humor that surprised him into laughter when he least expected it, and that she was stubborn as hell when she thought she was right about something. "You need to reinforce that corner beam," she insisted one afternoon, pointing at the section of wall they were planning to rebuild. "Otherwise the whole thing might come down again in heavy snow. It will be fine. That is not the beam that failed." "Knox Foster, I am telling you that corner needs bracing. My father would have braced it, and he built houses that stood for 30 years. Knox wanted to argue on principle, but the determined set of her jaw told him it would be pointless. "Fine, we will brace it. Thank you." Grace's tone softened. "I am not trying to be difficult, I just do not want you to go through this again. I know." And he did know, could see the genuine concern in her eyes. I appreciate it. All of it, Grace. I do not think I have said that clearly enough. You are welcome. She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, and Knox felt something electric pass between them, a connection he had not expected and was not sure what to do with. They had been working together for nearly 2 weeks when Grace showed up one morning looking different. It took Knox a moment to figure out what had changed. Then he realized she was wearing a dress he had not seen before, pale yellow instead of her usual faded blues and grays, and her hair was arranged more carefully, with small wildflowers tucked into her braid. "You look nice," he said, then immediately felt stupid for how inadequate the words were. Grace actually blushed, and Knox found it charming. "Thank you. It is my Sunday dress, but I thought, well, I do not know what I thought. Forget it." "No, really, you look beautiful." The word came out before he could stop it, honest and unfiltered, and Grace's blush deepened. "We should get to work," she said, but she was smiling as she turned away. That day felt different from all the others. They were getting close to finishing the excavation and beginning the actual rebuild, which meant their time working together was approaching an end. Knox had not let himself think about what would happen when the house was finished, and Grace stopped coming every day. The thought of her absence made his chest tighten in a way he could not quite explain. They were taking a water break in the afternoon when Grace suddenly said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Why did you really come to Utah?" "You said it was for opportunities, but there are plenty of places with opportunities. Why here specifically?" Knox set down the ladle and considered the question. "My father wanted me to take over his dry goods store back in Missouri. Respectable work, steady income, but it was suffocating. Every day the same, every conversation about inventory and prices and customers who complained about everything. I wanted something more, wanted to build something with my own hands that meant something." He gestured at the partially cleared wreckage. "Guess I got what I asked for." "You did build something," Grace said firmly. "The roof collapsed, but you built this ranch from nothing. That still matters. The work is not undone just because you have to do some of it again." "Is that what you tell yourself when things go wrong, every single day?" Grace smiled sadly. "When I first came here, I had $20 and a trunk full of my mother's belongings. I spent the first week sleeping in my wagon because I could not afford a room. I thought about turning back 100 times, convinced I had made a mistake. But then I remembered why I left, remembered that staying would have meant marrying a man I did not love just for security." She met his eyes. "So yes, I tell myself that the hard parts are worth it, because the alternative was worse." Knox wanted to ask about the man she had not married, wanted to know her whole story, but the vulnerability in her expression stopped him. Instead, he said, "I am glad you stayed, glad you are here." "Me too," Grace said softly, and the air between them felt charged with unspoken words. They started the actual reconstruction the following week, and it was harder work than the excavation had been. Knox had enough saved to buy some new lumber, but he would have to be strategic about what he purchased and what he could salvage. Grace helped him measure and calculate, her experience with her father's carpentry work proving invaluable as they planned the rebuild. "You need to raise the roofline here," she said, sketching on a piece of paper with a stub of pencil. "It will give you more space in the loft and better ventilation in summer. That will cost more. Not if we reuse these beams here and here." Grace marked the drawing. "See, we can make it work with what you have got if we are smart about it." Knox studied her sketch, impressed by her practical design sense. "You could have been an architect." "Women cannot be architects." "Says who?" Grace laughed. "Says everyone, but I appreciate the sentiment." They worked on the frame first, setting posts and securing beams, with Knox doing the heavy lifting and Grace directing the placement with an unerring eye for what was level, and what was not. It was demanding work that left them both exhausted, but there was satisfaction in watching the structure take shape, in seeing walls rise from the rubble. One evening, as they were securing the last beam of the western wall, Grace's foot slipped on the ladder. Knox caught her without thinking, his hands closing around her waist as she fell backward. For a moment they were frozen like that, Grace in his arms, her face inches from his, both of them breathing hard from the surprise and the exertion of the day. "Thank you," Grace whispered. "Any time," Knox said, and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with catching her. Grace's hands were resting on his shoulders, and neither of them moved to break the contact. Knox could feel the warmth of her through the thin fabric of her dress, could see the pulse beating in her throat. He wanted to kiss her so badly it was almost painful, but he did not know if she wanted the same thing, did not want to presume or ruin what they had built together. "Knox," Grace said, his name barely a breath, and he saw the answer in her eyes before she said anything else. He kissed her then, gentle and questioning, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. But Grace did not pull away. Her hands slid up to cup his face, and she kissed him back with a sweetness that made his heart hammer in his chest. It was not a long kiss, just a moment of connection that felt like everything shifting into place, and when they broke apart, Grace was smiling. "I have been wanting to do that for days," Knox admitted. "Only days. I have been thinking about it since the second week." He laughed, giddy with relief and joy. "Why did you not say something?" "Because you are impossible to read, Knox Foster. I had no idea if you thought of me as a friend or something more, definitely something more." Knox set her down carefully, reluctant to let go but aware they were standing in the middle of his construction site. "Grace, I know this is complicated. I do not have much to offer right now, but I care about you a lot, and I would like to see where this goes if you are willing." Grace's smile widened. "I am very willing, and you have more to offer than you think." They kissed again, longer this time, and Knox felt like maybe his roof collapsing had been the best thing that could have happened to him because it had brought Grace Ramsey into his life. The reconstruction continued, but now there was a new dimension to their work. They stole kisses when they took breaks, held hands while discussing plans, found excuses to work close together. Knox felt like a teenager sometimes, giddy and distracted, but Grace seemed equally affected. She would catch his eye across the building site and smile in a way that made his pulse race, or she would lean against him while they studied a problem, and the simple contact would make it hard to think. "We are never going to finish this house if you keep looking at me like that," Grace said one afternoon, laughing. "Like what?" "Like you want to kiss me instead of working." "I do want to kiss you instead of working." Knox proved his point by doing exactly that, pulling her close and kissing her until they were both breathless. "But I also want to finish the house so I can properly court you." "Who says we need to wait for the house to be finished?" Grace raised an eyebrow. "You can court me while we build." "Is that acceptable?" "Knox, I am a 23-year-old unmarried woman living alone in the Utah Territory. I stopped worrying about acceptable a long time ago." She smiled up at him. "But if you want to do this properly, you could start by asking me to dinner." "Grace Ramsey, would you have dinner with me?" "I would love to. Your place or mine," he laughed. "Considering my place currently has no walls, maybe yours." Grace hosted him that evening at her small cabin on the outskirts of Taylorsville. It was a modest place, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but she had made it comfortable with curtains at the windows and wildflowers in a jar on the table. She cooked rabbit stew and fresh bread, and they ate by lamplight while the summer evening faded to darkness outside. "This is the best meal I have had in months," Knox said honestly. "Thank you. You are welcome. It is nice to cook for someone besides myself." Grace refilled his coffee cup. Tell me more about your family. I feel like I know so little about you." Knox talked about growing up in Missouri, about his 3 older brothers who had all gone into respectable professions, about his mother who had worried when he announced he was heading west. Grace listened attentively, asking questions that showed she was genuinely interested, not just being polite. "You miss them?" she asked. "Sometimes. Mostly I miss my mother's cooking and my youngest brother's terrible jokes, but I do not miss the life I would have had there." Knox met her eyes across the table. "What about you? Any siblings?" "No, it was just me. My mother always said I was miracle enough." Grace's expression turned wistful. "She wanted me to be a teacher, thought it was a respectable profession for a woman. I tried for a while, but after she died, I could not stay in that town. Too many memories." "Do you ever regret leaving?" "Not anymore." Grace reached across the table and took his hand. "Coming here was hard, but it led me to this moment. I would not trade that for anything." They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams, learning the small details that made up a life. Knox discovered that Grace loved thunderstorms, that she could read Latin because her father had insisted she get a proper education, that she had a scar on her left knee from falling out of a tree when she was 8. Grace learned that Knox could play the harmonica but was too self-conscious to perform for anyone, that he wanted to expand his ranch someday to include cattle, that he had a weakness for cherry pie. When Knox finally left, walking back to his property under a sky full of stars, he felt like the luckiest man alive. His house might be in ruins, but he had found something infinitely more valuable in the wreckage. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and growing affection. The house took shape steadily, walls rising and the roof coming together beam by beam. Grace's expertise proved invaluable again and again, catching potential problems before they became disasters, suggesting solutions that saved time and materials. Knox marveled at how well they worked together, how they had developed an almost intuitive understanding of what the other needed. But it was more than just work compatibility. Knox found himself falling for Grace in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She was strong and capable, yes, but also tender and vulnerable in moments when she let her guard down. She cried once when they uncovered a family Bible in the rubble, reminded of her own mother's Bible left behind in Ohio. Knox held her while she wept, and when she apologized for being emotional, he told her she never had to apologize for feeling things with him. Grace opened up more about her past as they grew closer, telling him about the man in Ohio who had proposed marriage with all the enthusiasm of someone discussing a business transaction. "He did not love me and I did not love him," she explained while they were taking a break from shingling the roof. "But everyone expected us to marry because it made sense. He owned land, I needed security. The practical thing would have been to say yes. Why did you not?" "Because I could not imagine spending the rest of my life with someone I felt nothing for. It seemed worse than being alone." Grace looked at him seriously. "I know that probably sounds foolish. Most women do not have the luxury of marrying for love." "It does not sound foolish. It sounds brave." Knox brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I am glad you waited." "Me too," Grace said, and kissed him with a sweetness that made him forget about the half-finished roof entirely. They finished the house on a warm afternoon in early September, nearly 6 weeks after the collapse. Knox hammered in the final shingle while Grace held the ladder, and when he climbed down, they stood together looking at what they had built. It was not the same house that had stood before. It was better, stronger, designed with care and constructed with attention to every detail. The roof was higher, the windows larger, the frame reinforced to withstand whatever weather the Utah Territory might throw at it. "We did it," Grace said, a note of wonder in her voice. You did it, Knox corrected. I would still be digging through rubble if you had not shown up. We did it together, Grace insisted. That is the whole point, is it not? Some things are too big to do alone. Knox pulled her into his arms, holding her close while the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property. Grace Ramsey, I love you. He felt her go still in his arms, then she pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face. You love me. I love you, he repeated, suddenly nervous. I know it has only been a few weeks and maybe it is too soon to say it, but I cannot keep it to myself anymore. You helped me build my house back, but you did more than that. You gave me a reason to care about building it, a future worth working toward. He took a breath. I love you, and I want you in my life, not just for this project, but for everything that comes after. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I love you too. I think I have loved you since you caught me when I fell off the ladder, maybe even before that. Knox kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring everything he felt into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. Stay. Move in with me. I know it is not proper, but I do not want to spend another night without you. Knox Foster, are you asking me to live in sin? No. I am asking you to live with me while I figure out how to give you a proper proposal and a wedding, he smiled. Unless you would rather I propose right now, I can do that if you want. Grace laughed, bright and joyful. Ask me again when you have a ring and have thought about what you really want to say. But yes, I will stay. Probably I should not, but I do not care about propriety anymore. I just want to be with you. They spent that evening moving Grace's belongings from her cabin to the newly rebuilt house, loading her trunk and few pieces of furniture onto her wagon, and making the short trip 3 times to transport everything. It was not much. Grace traveled light, but each item she unpacked and placed in the house felt significant, a commitment to their shared future. That night, they lay together in Knox's bed, the one piece of furniture that had survived the collapse relatively intact. Grace's head rested on his chest, her hair spread across his shoulder, and Knox felt a contentment he had never experienced before. The house around them was solid and strong, built to last, just like what he hoped they were building together. What are you thinking about? Grace asked quietly. That I am grateful my roof collapsed. Is that terrible? Grace propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her expression amused. Why would you be grateful for that? Because it brought you into my life. If the roof had not caved in, I would have just kept working alone, kept myself isolated from everyone. Knox reached up to touch her face. I would never have met you, never have fallen in love with you. So yes, I am grateful, even though it was horrible at the time. That is not terrible. It is sweet. Grace leaned down and kissed him gently. Though I prefer to think we would have met eventually, roof collapse or not, Taylorsville is not that big. Maybe, but we met because of the collapse, and that is our story now. Our story, Grace repeated, testing the words. I like the sound of that. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Knox dreamed of the future for the first time in years, seeing not obstacles but possibilities. The autumn months passed in a comfortable rhythm as Knox and Grace settled into their life together. They worked on improving the property, building a better chicken coop, and expanding the vegetable garden before winter arrived. Grace continued her sewing work, taking on projects from women in town who appreciated her skilled needlework, while Knox focused on building up his herd and preparing for the cold months ahead. The people of Taylorsville had opinions about their living arrangement, of course. Small towns always did. Mrs. Chen defended them to anyone who criticized, pointing out that Grace and Knox were clearly devoted to each other and would probably marry when they were ready. Others were less charitable, particularly some of the church ladies who made pointed comments about propriety and sin. Grace handled it with more grace than the comments deserved. "Let them talk," she told Knox when he fumed about an especially rude encounter at the Mercantile. "We know what we mean to each other. Their approval is not required for our happiness. It bothers me that they judge you. They have always judged me. Unmarried woman living alone, supporting herself with trade work. I have been scandalous since I arrived." Grace smiled and kissed his cheek. "At least now I have a good reason for their disapproval." Knox knew she was right, but he still wanted to defend her honor, wanted everyone to know how extraordinary she was. That desire was part of what made him finally sit down one evening in late October and plan a proper proposal. He wanted to marry Grace, wanted to make their commitment official and permanent, wanted the whole territory to know she was his and he was hers. He took a trip to Salt Lake City, riding 2 days to reach the larger settlement, and spending most of his savings on a simple gold band with a small sapphire set in it. The jeweler tried to sell him something fancier, but Knox knew Grace would prefer something practical and beautiful rather than ostentatious. The sapphire was the color of the Utah sky at twilight, and he thought it suited her perfectly. When he returned, Grace was in the kitchen kneading bread dough, her sleeves rolled up and flour dusting her hands. She looked up when he entered, her face breaking into a smile. "You are back. I missed you." "I missed you too." Knox set down his saddlebags and just looked at her for a moment, memorizing the scene because he knew this was a moment he would want to remember. "Grace, can you come outside with me for a minute? Now, I have got dough rising and dinner to prepare. It will only take a minute, please." Grace wiped her hands on her apron, curious now, and followed him outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in the exact shade of twilight blue he had been thinking about when he bought the ring. Knox led her to the spot where the worst of the rubble had been, the place where she had first started helping him dig out from the disaster. "You remember that first day you came here?" Knox asked. "Of course. You looked like you wanted to send me away." "I did. I thought accepting help was the same as admitting defeat." He took her hands in his. "But you insisted on staying, insisted on helping me dig out and rebuild. You gave me your time, your knowledge, your strength, and you asked for nothing in return. You saved me, Grace, in more ways than just the house." Grace's eyes were shining now, and he could see she was starting to understand where this was going. "Knox, let me finish." He smiled at her. "These past few months with you have been the best of my life. You make everything better just by being in it. You are strong and smart and beautiful, and you see the best in people even when they do not deserve it. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone." Knox released one of her hands to pull the ring box from his pocket, then dropped to one knee. Grace made a small sound, her free hand coming up to cover her mouth. "Grace Ramsey, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Will you marry me?" "Yes," Grace said immediately, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Knox slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Grace pulled him to his feet and kissed him with enough passion to make him dizzy, and when they broke apart, she was laughing and crying at the same time. "I love you so much, and this ring is beautiful. When did you get this?" "Salt Lake City. That is where I have been the last 2 days." "You rode 2 days to buy me a ring?" "I would have ridden a lot farther if necessary." Knox kissed her again. "You deserve the best of everything, Grace. I am sorry I cannot give you that yet, but I promise I will spend my life trying. You already give me everything that matters." Grace held up her hand, admiring the way the sapphire caught the fading light. "When should we get married?" "Tomorrow, if you want. I do not want to wait. Tomorrow might be rushing it, but soon, before winter really sets in." Grace smiled mischievously. "Besides, the sooner we marry, the sooner the church ladies will have to find something else to gossip about. They decided on a date 3 weeks away, enough time to make basic preparations, but not so long that they had to wait through the whole winter. Grace sewed herself a new dress in deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and Knox bought a new shirt and had his one good suit cleaned and pressed. They kept the wedding small, just a few friends and neighbors at the small church in Taylorsville with Mrs. Chen and her husband standing as witnesses. Grace walked down the short aisle alone, carrying a bouquet of dried wildflowers, and Knox felt his throat tighten as he watched her come toward him. She looked radiant, happy in a way that made her beauty almost ethereal. When she reached him and took his hand, he had to blink back tears. The ceremony was simple and brief, the minister keeping his remarks practical rather than preachy. They exchanged vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever challenges life brought. When Knox slipped the gold band onto Grace's finger, matching the engagement ring she already wore, his hand was shaking. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said. "You may kiss your bride." Knox did thoroughly, to the amusement of the small gathering. When they broke apart, Grace was blushing but smiling, and Knox felt like he might burst with happiness. They were married, actually married, and nothing had ever felt more right. The reception was held at the Chen's restaurant, with food and drink that the Chens had insisted on providing as their wedding gift. It was a warm, joyful celebration, despite the small numbers, with neighbors offering congratulations and good wishes. Even some of the church ladies who had been critical attended, drawn by curiosity or perhaps a sense of obligation, and they seemed surprised by how genuine the happiness between Knox and Grace was. "You did well," Mrs. Chen told Knox when he thanked her for everything. "Grace is special. You take good care of her." "I intend to," Knox promised. That night they returned to their house as husband and wife, and Knox carried Grace over the threshold in the traditional manner, making her laugh with delight. The house they had built together was warm and welcoming, lit by lamplight and the fire crackling in the hearth. Knox set Grace down carefully, then just held her for a long moment. "We did it," Grace said softly. "We really did it. Best decision I ever made," Knox said and kissed his wife. Their first winter as a married couple was harsh, with heavy snows and temperatures that stayed below freezing for weeks at a time. But the house held strong against the weather, the reinforced roof bearing the weight of snow without complaint, and Knox was grateful every day for Grace's insistence on doing things right. They spent long evenings by the fire, Grace sewing while Knox read aloud from the few books they owned, comfortable in each other's presence. It was during one of those evenings in late January that Grace set aside her needlework and said, "Knox, I have something to tell you." The seriousness in her tone made him close his book immediately. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong, at least I do not think it is." Grace took a breath. "I am pregnant." Knox stared at her, processing the words. "Pregnant, you are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor." "I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been feeling poorly in the mornings." Grace watched his face anxiously. "Are you happy about it? I know we have not talked about children yet." "Happy." Knox crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "Grace, I am thrilled. Beyond thrilled. We are going to have a baby." Grace laughed, relieved and delighted by his reaction. "We are going to have a baby, in late summer, I think." "August, maybe." Knox set her down carefully, suddenly worried. "Should you be on your feet? Should you be resting? What do you need?" "I need you to stop looking at me like I might break. I am pregnant, not fragile." But Grace was smiling as she said it. "Though you can help by not complaining when I have to rush outside to be sick in the mornings." "Deal." Knox placed his hand gently on her stomach, marveling at the fact that their child was growing there. "I love you so much. I love you too. You are going to be a wonderful father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring months. Grace continued most of her normal activities, only slowing down as her belly grew and made certain tasks more difficult. Knox became almost comically protective, insisting on doing all the heavy lifting and worrying whenever Grace so much as winced. She bore his hovering with good humor, understanding it came from love even when it was excessive. They prepared a cradle together, with Knox doing the woodwork and Grace sewing small blankets and gowns. Mrs. Chen gave them practical advice about childbirth and infant care, having raised 5 children of her own, and Grace was grateful for the older woman's matter-of-fact approach. Some of the other women in town, having warmed to Grace after the wedding, also offered help and advice. The baby came in mid-August during a thunderstorm, which Grace later said was fitting given her love of storms. The labor was long and difficult, and Knox spent most of it pacing outside their bedroom while Mrs. Chen attended to Grace. When he finally heard the cry of a newborn, thin and indignant, he nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Chen emerged a few minutes later, smiling. "You have a son. Big, healthy boy, and Grace did wonderfully. You can go in now." Knox entered the bedroom to find Grace propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had sewn. She looked up when he came in, and her smile was luminous. "Come meet your son." Knox approached slowly, overwhelmed by the moment. The baby was tiny, with a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face that was somehow the most beautiful thing Knox had ever seen after Grace herself. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe he is ours." "Believe it." Grace shifted the baby carefully. "Do you want to hold him?" Knox took his son with trembling hands, terrified of doing something wrong. But the baby settled against his chest with a small sound, and Knox felt something in his heart expand. This was his son, his family, the future he and Grace had built together. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking Caleb, after my father." Grace watched them both with tender eyes. "If you like it, Caleb Foster. I like it very much." Knox looked down at his son and felt tears on his face. "Welcome to the world, Caleb. Your mother and I are going to take such good care of you." The early weeks of parenthood were exhausting and chaotic in a way nothing had prepared them for. Caleb was a demanding baby who woke frequently to nurse and seemed to have his days and nights confused. Knox and Grace took turns walking him through the house in the small hours, singing lullabies and murmuring reassurances while they stumbled through their new reality. But even in the exhaustion, there was profound joy. Knox loved watching Grace nurse their son, the tender intimacy of the bond between mother and child. He loved the way Caleb would grip his finger with surprising strength, the baby yawns that were almost comically large, the way Caleb would settle when Knox held him against his chest and hummed. Every small milestone felt momentous, from Caleb's first smile to the first time he slept for 4 hours straight. "I cannot believe we made him," Knox said one evening watching Caleb sleep in his cradle. "I can. I was there for the whole process." Grace leaned against him, tired but content. "But I know what you mean. It does seem miraculous. You are miraculous." Knox kissed the top of her head. "I do not know how you do it, taking care of him all day while I am working. The same way you rebuild a collapsed house, one piece at a time with help when you need it." Grace smiled up at him. "We are good at building things together, you and I. A house, a marriage, now a family. I think we make a good team." "The best team," Knox agreed. Caleb grew from an infant into a fat, happy baby, then into a curious toddler who kept them constantly on their toes. He was walking by 10 months, which seemed impossibly early, and talking in short sentences by his second birthday. Knox and Grace marveled at his development, every new word and skill a source of pride and wonder. The ranch prospered too. Knox expanded his herd gradually, buying cattle when he had the money, and building his reputation as someone who raised quality stock. Grace's sewing business grew as well, with women coming from neighboring towns to commission her work. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable and building something lasting. When Caleb was 3, Grace announced she was pregnant again. Knox was delighted, though also slightly terrified at the prospect of managing 2 small children. This pregnancy was easier than the first, Grace knowing what to expect and her body having done this before. She gave birth to a daughter in early spring, and they named her Caroline Rose, combining names from both their mothers. Caroline was different from her brother in temperament, quieter and more observant where Caleb had been boisterous and active. She studied the world with solemn eyes and rarely cried, content to watch her older brother's antics with what looked like bemusement. Knox fell in love with his daughter instantly and completely, marveling at her tiny perfection. 2 children, Grace said one night after getting both babies to sleep. Can you believe we have 2 children now? Barely. Knox pulled her close, grateful for a moment of quiet togetherness. You make it look easy, but I know it is not. Nothing worth doing is easy. You taught me that. Grace rested her head on his shoulder. Do you ever think about that first day I came to help you dig out, how neither of us knew where it would lead, all the time? Best disaster that ever happened to me, Grace laughed softly. Only you would call a collapsed roof the best disaster. It brought me you, so yes, best disaster. Knox kissed her temple. I love our life, Grace. I love our family. I love you. That is enough for me. It is enough for me too. The years flowed by in the way they do when life is full and good, marked by small moments rather than dramatic events. Caleb started school in Taylorsville, walking the 2 miles each way with other ranch children, his lunch pail swinging from one hand. Caroline proved to have her mother's artistic talent, drawing pictures that covered every available surface in the house. Knox and Grace celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary, then their 10th, marking time not in grand gestures but in accumulated days of partnership and love. The house they had rebuilt after the collapse remained solid and strong, weathering storms and seasons without complaint. Knox added to it over the years, building an additional bedroom when Caroline complained about sharing with Caleb, constructing a proper barn to replace the old lean-to. Each improvement was done with Grace's input, the 2 of them planning and designing together, just as they had with the original rebuild. Taylorsville grew around them too, transforming from a rough frontier settlement into an established town. The railroad came through when Caleb was 8, bringing new commerce and new people. The church ladies who had once gossiped about Knox and Grace's living arrangement were replaced by a younger generation who did not remember or care about the scandal. The Chens retired from their restaurant, passing it to their youngest son, and Knox and Grace attended the celebration dinner along with what seemed like half the territory. We are becoming respectable, Grace teased him one evening after a town social where they had been asked to join the planning committee for the new school building. Speak for yourself. I am still a wild rancher at heart. But Knox was smiling as he said it. He did not mind respectability if it came with the life they had built. When Caleb was 15 and Caroline 12, Grace discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise to everyone including Grace herself. I thought we were done, she told Knox, half laughing and half worried. I am 41 years old. Women my age do not usually have babies. Apparently this one does. Knox was surprised too, but pleased. How do you feel about it, honestly? terrified and excited in equal measure. Grace put her hand on her still flat stomach. "But we have done this before. We will manage." The pregnancy was harder than the previous two, Grace's body older and less resilient than it had been. She was exhausted frequently and suffered from back pain that made it hard to work. Knox took on more of the household responsibilities, with Caleb and Caroline stepping up to help as well. It was a family effort, just like everything else they did. Grace gave birth to another boy in late spring, and they named him Samuel after Knox's father, who had passed away the previous year. Samuel was small but healthy, with Grace's green eyes and a head full of red hair that neither parent could account for. Caleb and Caroline were fascinated by their new brother, arguing over who got to hold him and helping with diaper changes and late-night feedings. "3 children," Knox said, holding Samuel while Grace rested. "Our family is complete now. Definitely complete. I'm too old for this again." But Grace was smiling as she said it, watching her husband cradle their youngest son with the same tenderness he had shown their first. Samuel grew into a cheerful, mischievous child who kept everyone entertained. He adored his older siblings and followed them everywhere, trying to keep up despite the age gap. The house rang with laughter and the chaos of a busy family, and Knox often found himself pausing in whatever he was doing just to appreciate the abundance of his life. He thought about the collapse sometimes, about standing in the ruins of his house and feeling like everything had ended. It had seemed like the worst possible disaster at the time, a confirmation of all his fears that he had made a mistake coming to Utah Territory. But it had been the beginning of everything that mattered, the moment that had brought Grace into his life and set them on the path to this future. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked Grace one evening when they were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains while their children played in the yard. Samuel was 6 now, arguing with Caleb about something while Caroline read under a tree. "Stopping to help me that day? Never." "Not once." Grace took his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically. "Why do you ask?" "Because I was thinking about how different my life would be if you had not come. If you had decided I was not worth the trouble, or if you had your own problems and could not spare the time." Knox looked at her seriously. "I would have rebuilt eventually, but I would have done it alone. I would have missed everything that matters. You would not have missed it forever. You would have met someone else, built a different life. Maybe. But it would not have been this life, and I cannot imagine wanting any other." Knox squeezed her hand. "You gave me more than help digging out and building back. You gave me a reason to care about building something lasting. You gave me family, partnership, love. Everything I have that is good started with you." Grace's eyes were shining with tears. "Knox Foster, after 22 years of marriage, you can still make me cry with your sweet words. Good. I never want to stop telling you what you mean to me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children and the fading light. It was these moments Knox treasured most, the ordinary evenings that made up the texture of their life together. The grand gestures and dramatic moments were fine, but it was the daily choosing of each other, the accumulated weight of thousands of small kindnesses and shared experiences, that built something lasting. Caleb left for university in Salt Lake City when he was 18, planning to study agricultural science so he could return and help improve the ranch. His departure left a hole in the family, but they were proud of his ambition and supported his dreams. Caroline, showing her mother's artistic bent, wanted to study art in San Francisco, which terrified Knox but filled Grace with pride. "She has to follow her path," Grace told him when he worried about their daughter moving so far away. "We raised her to be strong and independent. We cannot hold her back just because we will miss her. I know, but she is still my little girl. She will always be your little girl, but she is also a young woman with talent and dreams." Grace smiled at him. "Trust her. Trust that we raised her well." Caroline left for San Francisco when she was 19, and though Knox worried constantly, she thrived there. Her letters home were full of excitement about her classes and new experiences, and the sketches she sent showed real growth in her skills. Knox kept every letter and every sketch, proud despite his fears. Samuel grew into a teenager with his own interests and personality, showing a talent for working with horses that reminded Knox of himself at that age. He helped with the ranch work without complaint and had an easy charm that made him popular in town. Knox and Grace watched their youngest grow with a bittersweet awareness that their time with children in the house was limited. "We are getting old," Grace said one morning, looking at the gray streaking through Knox's hair. "Speak for yourself. I am distinguished." Knox struck a dramatic pose that made her laugh. "You are 62 years old and your knee hurts when it rains. We are old." "Fine, we are old. But we are old together, which is what matters." Knox pulled her close, still able to make her heart flutter after all these years. "And I still love you as much as I did the day I proposed, more even because I know you better now. I love you too. Always have, always will." The years continued their steady march. Caleb returned from university and took over more of the ranch operations, implementing new techniques he had learned and slowly expanding their holdings. He married a woman named Alice from Salt Lake City, and they gave Knox and Grace their first grandchild, a girl named Emma who had Grace's eyes. Caroline returned from San Francisco for visits, bringing paintings she had created and stories of her life in the city. She eventually married a fellow artist named Thomas, and though they stayed in California, they visited often enough that Knox did not feel like he had lost his daughter. Samuel, surprising everyone, decided he wanted to be a veterinarian and went off to study in Denver. He was brilliant at it, his natural affinity for animals translating well to formal medical training. He returned to Taylorsville after completing his education and set up a practice that served ranchers throughout the region. Knox and Grace became grandparents multiple times over, their house filling with visiting children and grandchildren during holidays. They had built something lasting, not just the physical structure of the house and ranch, but a family legacy of love and partnership. Knox was 73 when his health began to fail, his heart weak after a lifetime of hard work. The doctor in Taylorsville was honest about the prognosis. Knox had months, maybe a year, but not much more. Knox took the news with equanimity, having lived a full and satisfying life, but Grace's grief was immediate and profound. "I am not ready," she told him through tears. "I am not ready to lose you. I know, my love, I am not ready either." Knox held her, wishing he could spare her this pain. "But we have had 50 years together. 50 good years. That is more than most people get. It is not enough. It will never be enough." Knox could not argue with that because he felt the same way. No amount of time would be sufficient, but he was grateful for what they had shared. As his health declined, he made sure his affairs were in order, that Grace and the children would be provided for. He said his goodbyes, told each of his children and grandchildren how much he loved them, made sure they knew what they meant to him. But it was Grace he focused on most. Grace he wanted to comfort and reassure. They spent long hours sitting together, holding hands and reminiscing about their life. Knox told her again and again how much she had given him, how she had saved him in every way that mattered. "That first day you came to help me," he said weakly, his strength fading, "I thought you were going to be trouble. You were so insistent, so sure you could help." "I was trouble," Grace said, smiling through her tears. "But good trouble. The best trouble. You changed everything, Grace." You took a man with a collapsed roof and nothing to live for, and you gave him a reason to rebuild, not just the house, but his whole life. Knox squeezed her hand with what little strength he had. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for insisting. Thank you for loving me. Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did. Grace kissed him gently. You rest now. I will be right here. Knox Foster passed away peacefully in his sleep a few days later, with Grace holding his hand and his children gathered around. He was 73 years old and had lived a life full of love, work, and family. The ranch he had built from ruins stood strong, a testament to what could be accomplished when two people chose to build together. Grace grieved deeply, as anyone would after losing a partner of 50 years. But she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the community they had been part of for so long, in the memories of a life well lived. She continued living in the house they had rebuilt together, surrounded by reminders of Knox and the love they had shared. She lived another 12 years, active and engaged with her family until the end. When she passed away at 86, peacefully in her garden on a warm summer day, her children laid her to rest next to Knox in the Taylorsville Cemetery. The headstone was simple but meaningful. Grace Foster, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She helped build something lasting. The ranch passed to Caleb and then to his children, generation after generation maintaining what Knox and Grace had started. The house stood for over a century, its strong bones and careful construction, a testament to the care that had gone into its rebuilding. And the story was told and retold of how Knox Foster's roof had caved in and buried everything, and how Grace Ramsey had helped him dig it out and build it back, and how in the process they had built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Their great-great-grandchildren would walk through the rooms of the old house and hear the stories, learning about the man who had lost everything, and the woman who had stopped to help him, about how disaster had become opportunity, about how two people could build something lasting if they chose to do it together. The roof had caved in and buried everything, but what rose from the ruins was stronger and more beautiful than what had been lost. That was the legacy Knox and Grace left behind, not just a physical structure, but proof that with love and partnership and hard work, anything could be rebuilt, anything could be made whole again. The story of Knox Foster and Grace Ramsey became part of Taylorsville's history, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best things, if we are open to help and willing to build something new from the ruins. Their love story was simple in its way. No grand drama or epic tragedy, just two people who chose each other every day for 50 years, who built a life together board by board and memory by memory, who proved that the strongest foundations are laid not in perfect conditions, but in the process of rebuilding after everything has fallen apart.